Good afternoon, ma'am. Shall I begin my class? कितने लोग आए हैं? Have you gone through anything? Have you gone through any chapter? आप लोगों ने कुछ क्लास की है, पढ़ाई की है इसमें नहीं? Have you revised anything?
Yes, ma'am. Chapter 1.
आलोक जी क्लास शुरू करेंगे?
जी बिल्कुल मैम।
क्योंकि सिर्फ 3 ही स्टूडेंट आए हैं लगता है।
आप स्टार्ट कीजिए।
ओके। Today that I would like to take up new museology. Before I proceed for this particular topic, I would like to give a briefing about how this museology, new museology came into being. As we earlier learned how this definition of museum came into being and the different phases through which the present definition has arrived. So I would like to tell you that this museological practices is not a recent one. It's long back that we have already studied in the history of museum. Now, these traditional museums around the world were forced to undergo changes and become more inclusive and representative of the community in light of post-colonial criticism and new museum theory. New museum theory, which is also known as critical museum theory or new museology, was a result of the debate around the growing demands for the inclusion of indigenous people in the representation of their cultural heritage. As a result, new roles and directions for museums and heritage institutions have emerged, which put forward a different museological approach focused not only on artifacts but also on people. So, under this new approach, the concept of a museum as a dynamic cultural center replaces the concept of museum as a repository of collections. Now, in this definition, we have learned that it included both tangible and intangible. So, intangible heritage, which has been included in 2007, but its inclusion in museum was actually started long back. What is new museology? As I said, that new museum theory or the critical museum theory. So what does this mean? So in the post-colonial critique of museums that led to the rise of a new form of museology from around 1980s is this new museology, which resulted from collaboration between the scholarly communities and source communities whose cultures are on display in museums. One of the museum professional named Peter Virgo defined museology as a state of widespread dissatisfaction with the old museology, both within and outside the museum profession, and further points out that what is wrong with the old museology is that it is too much about museum methods and too little about the purpose of museums. An important objective of new museology is giving the communities control over the representation and management of their own cultural heritage, thus embracing multiple perspectives. As an approach, new museology is concerned with making museum practices more democratized and rejects the top-down power with making down power structures historically found within museums. It does not stand in opposition to traditional museums, but provides new insights and concepts in order to create a more inclusive model where the development of local communities is made a priority. The knowledge and skills of people are considered as valuable as those of museum professionals. As such, the communities assume the role of curators, while the museum staffs and curators act as facilitators. The new museologists strive to bridge the gap between professionals and non-professionals by working with community members, utilizing the people's knowledge, experience, and resources. In this manner, museums functions as what this James Clifford calls it a contact zone, which is a space where different cultures come into contact with for the purpose of discussion, negotiation, and dialogue. Mary Louise Prats, who uses it to refer the space of colonial encounters, the space in which peoples geographically and historically separated come into contact with each other and establish ongoing relations, usually involving conditions of coercion, radical inequality, and intractable conflict. Clifford provides an important model of a museum as a contact zone for its successful functioning in the 21st century. Clifford's model of museum as contact zone is a space where different cultures come into contact for the purpose of discussion, negotiation, and dialogue. When museums are seen as contact zones, their organizing structure as a collection becomes an ongoing historical, political, moral relationship, power change sets of exchanges of push and pull. Now, there was a roundtable organized by UNESCO in Santiago de Chile in 1972. Was the first significant international event under the new museology movement. As I told you, that this new museology came into being because of this monotonous or static display of objects. Now, museologists themselves, they tried to make it, they tried to concentrate or they tried to involve the community or the local people for the benefit of the society as well as to maintain or preserve our cultural heritage. So, from time to time, just like we have this kind of seminars and conferences, this roundtable discussion came into being in 1972, and It was the first significant international event which was focused on new museology. This resulted in the Declaration of Santiago de Chile, which was published by UNESCO in 1973. One of the key ideas that came out of this is that museums have a responsibility towards meeting the needs of their communities. It was at this conference that the concept of integral museum was born. Thereafter, several other workshops and seminars were conducted in different parts of the world to discuss the evolving theoretical framework of new museology. Henceforth, with the development of new museology, the concept of this heritage has undergone a drastic change. The Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage adopted by UNESCO in 2003 had a great impact in bringing a shift in our understanding of cultural heritage from static and monumental to dynamic and living, calling for a more inclusive and people-oriented museum approach. Now, how this new museology developed from time to time. Museological practices in 1980s were greatly influenced by the new museology movement, as I told you just now how this movement started, why this movement started, which stressed the social role of museums in the development of its respective societies in contrast to the old classical model, which have greater importance to collections. Earlier, collections were the main reason to have a museum. Now, from collections, the focus has been shifted to the social benefit of the people. As a result, several variants of new museums began to emerge, like integral museum, neighborhood museum, community, eco-museum, and open-air museum. These museums are mostly established, administered, and run by members of a community within their own territory to fulfill their social, cultural, economic, or environmental needs. Such museums are best suited and successful in small territories. The Anacostia Community Museum, which was earlier Anacostia Neighborhood Museum, which was opened in 1967, was an intermediary of the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., can be considered as one of the first examples of new museum concept. This Anacostia Museum actually was took the initiative of this new museum concept. The museum was more oriented towards its people and less focused on objects. Such community museums develop as part of a community development project which requires active participations of its respective communities. Now, this integral museum, as I told you here, that this this new museology has these different categorization, which are known as integral, neighborhood, community, and eco and open air museum. The Anacostia Museum, as I told you, that it was first a community museum, then well, first of all it was a neighborhood museum, which was then later on included as a part of the community museum. So let's go through this, that what is, how this integral museum developed. Integral museum, which began in Latin America, is integrated in its approach as it is concerned both with the heritage and development of the society. Another kind of new museum model is the neighborhood museum, which is developed around the geographical area of the already existing established museum. Often, an already well-established traditional museum cannot break easily from its traditional museum function because of various reasons. Like the museums which are already existing, we cannot disintegrate or demolish that museum, because every museum before establishing physically, they prepare a mission statement and all those things, do's and don'ts, and what is the perimeter, what will be the perimeter of a museum. Everything is decided beforehand. So all of a sudden, we cannot just demolish the museum and state it as, let's start it with a neighborhood museum or interior museum like this. So instead of doing that, what museum professionals now trying to do, that within that traditional museum is there, and around, surrounded by it, within the neighborhood, there are so many things to understand about our intangible culture. So those are included as a part of that museum. So neighborhood museum, which is developed around the geographical area already existing established museum, and that well-established traditional museum, since cannot break from its traditional museum functions, so it is an effort to adapt a new museological roles, one of which is serving its communities. It can sponsor and assist a neighborhood museum. In this regard, the established museum functions only as a sponsoring agent, providing expert advice and training, while the intermediary in the form of the neighborhood museum is entirely independent in all other aspects of its operation. Now the next one is the concept of eco-museum, which was developed in France in around 1970s, is another important new museum model which could be best suited to represent indigenous cultures. It was Hugh Steverine, the former director of ICOM, who invented the term eco-museum, while it was George Henry Reverie who came up with its contents. In the words of George Henry Reverie, an eco-museum is an instrument conceived, fashioned, and operated jointly by a public authority and local population. Are you getting my point? Those who are available here, can you get what I am telling? Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
No, I am unable to understand whether you are getting or not. So, George Henry Reverie, and according to George Henry, an eco-museum is an instrument conceived, fashioned, and opened and operated jointly by a public authority and local population. The public authority's involvement is through the experts, facilities, and resources it provides. The local population's involvement depends on its aspiration, knowledge, and individual approach. The concept of eco-museum has been the driving force in bringing museum closer to the people. In this, man is shown in its natural environment. The population participates in the preservation and development of its natural and cultural heritage. The eco-museum also functions as a school for its population to learn about its past culture. It is not confined within the four walls, but cover entire territory of the local population. The Eco-Museum has also building housing permanent exhibitions. Like traditionally what a museum means a building plus collection plus public, and experts are there to maintain that. Whereas the concept of eco-museums include the territory, the cultural heritage or natural heritage, population, and all these actually are part of our memory. So this is one of the very important issue which took place in museum movement, is that how the objects that are housed in a museum can be connected to the society. Even without objects, these museums are developed where there are no objects, but the community or the natural existence of other intangible heritage are incorporated as a part of museum. Now, this is the basic difference between the old museum and the new museum concept. In the traditional museum, we need buildings, collection. It's a scientific discipline, how to preserve and conserve things. And we need, since museums are for the people, so different kinds of public, like volunteer, amateur are required. Pursuit of knowledge, education and entertainment. These are the traditional concept of a museum. But the shift from the traditional museum concept is that instead of buildings, we need a territory now, the whole area, the region. Instead of just showcasing or presenting the collections, we need the natural cultural heritage plus all other resources available in the community. Now it's a interdisciplinary approach. It's not that only that object is there, its history is there, and how to preserve and conserve it, that chemical preservation or the scientific discipline is, whatever scientific disciplines are, related disciplines are there. It is not limited within that. It's a global development and the interdisciplinary approach. The population of the community are included for understanding and for spreading the cause of that museum and the visitors to the community. And lastly, the capacity of creative initiative. So this is the new museum concept and this is the old museum concept. So these are the basic differences between the traditional and the new museum. So many communities around the world have come up with their own model of museum to meet their requirements, as there is no universal model which can be applied across cultures. Rini Reward has made an argument for people's museography, which is a body of techniques and practices applied by population to the conservation and enhancement in a museum or otherwise of the collective heritage of the community or territory. Depending on the local situations and requirements of the community, an appropriate model devised to suit their needs. Such an approach implies that there is no single set of curatorial practices that is universally applicable or appropriate. We all are free to think and create museums according to the benefits of the community benefits of the local people, not only for the preservation of cultural heritage, but also that benefits economically to the local people. Now we want to share something regarding the new museology in India. Around the world, people are aware and they took initiative, but this new museology concept, is it available in India or not? How far it has become successful, or whether there is some limitation for the Indian museum professionals. So in this Indian context, in around 1988, there was a seminar by Museum Association of India under the chairmanship of Dr. M.L. Nigam and leadership of prominent museum professional Professor B.H.U. was an important event where Indian museologists assembled together to discuss about the concept of new museology. As it was already in the global level, the concept of new museology has already taken place. Now let's discuss about how Indians focused on this and tried to shift from the traditional to the new museology concept. After that conference, after that Museum Association India seminar that was held in Guwahati, there was a declaration on new museology and it was adopted on 28 December 1988. Basically, it was agreed that museums should look beyond their walls and into the communities that they represent. Under the new museum paradigm, the idea of museum as a place for storing collections is now replaced by the idea of museum as a dynamic cultural center. Now the people realized that museum should not be a storehouse of antiquities only, but we should promote the idea or concept of our intangible cultural heritage. So further, for a museum to succeed, it must reflect the cultural and spiritual values of the community and should be able to meet the needs of the community. Professor B.H.U. stated that in order for a museum to be museologically relevant to different cultural contexts, they will need to make considerable changes in the development of post-museum, which is essentially a site from which to redress social inequalities. These changes should take into consideration the indigenous museological and curatorial approaches of non-Western cultures, which place great importance in preserving the intangible traditions with which the objects are associated. It is ethical museum practice to employ ethnomuseology, which is the use of culturally appropriate methods of curating and conserving ethnographic materials, which is derived from the knowledge systems of the source communities. This is not only limited to community centers or museums run by indigenous communities, but includes mainstream public museums. New museology movement was started in India in the 1980s, after the Guwahati Declaration on New Museology was unanimously adopted by Indian museologists. The early traditional museums in India were built following the European museum model, with emphasis on past culture and art history. One of the main principles and functions of museum under the new museological paradigm is the involvement of communities in all the developmental stage in the process of setting up a museum. Hence, the use of local heritage as a tool for local development through the active participation of local communities started in India too. Now there is one museum, the Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya or Museum of Mankind, which is in Bhopal, as I told you earlier also, could be said to be spearheading the new museum movement in India. Though established by Anthropological Survey of India around 1977 and is considered to be the biggest anthropological museum in our country. This museum boasts a huge ethnographic collection belonging to around 40 tribal communities from all parts of India. Apart from its actual size dwellings of various Indian tribes, it also has indoor museum space exhibiting the crafts and art items, agricultural implements, costumes, various household items belonging to different tribal communities. Now, we need to understand that why this museum, that Indira Gandhi Rashtriya Manav Sangrahalaya, is so important to for those who are learning about new museology or those who are the museum professionals or who are practicing museology. What is the importance of this museum? How this museum is actually attracting and spreading the the interest and involving the local communities of various sections of our country, various zones of our country. So at its inception, the museum had no objects in its collection, but it was founded on a set of principles with the goal of serving as a facilitator for forging interrelation between community and museums. The museum aims towards national integration and promotes research and training and inter-institutional networking for salvage and revitalization of vanishing but valuable cultural traditions and highlights the unity and diversity. This Manav Sangrahalaya does not aim at exhibiting physical artifacts as mere specimens of languishing, vanishing or dead cultures. Rather, it seeks to project, preserve, invigorate and present valuable elements of living cultures and build protective ramparts around endangered ones. It does not suggest that a physically or culturally moribund community is of necessity a community which deserves to die and find a niche in a museum. What distinguishes the Museum of Mankind at Bhopal from other open-air museums of the world is the fact that this museum considers itself as a dynamic instrument for preserving communities, their habitats, their biocultural diversities, bioconservation strategies, knowledge and skills. It considers ex situ conservation through display or storage, collection and documentation as an unavoidable and even necessity and as a very significant contribution to its primary objective of in situ salvage and revitalization. The mud houses and outdoor exhibits are allowed to experience nature and go through changes because of exposure to rain, wind or sun. Artists and representatives from respective indigenous communities are the ones who build, design and decorate their own traditional houses. The houses are restored annually or as required by them. A key emphasis of the new museum movement is the use of local heritage as tool for local development through the active participation of local communities, which the museum lives up to. The museum actively engages with communities and regularly conducts workshops, lectures, exhibitions in an effort to promote the rich living traditions of India. From time to time, they are organizing as many seminars and exhibitions, online exhibitions, webinars, everything is going on now apart from their regular curriculum. Since New Museology is also about challenging and replacing the colonial myths and stereotypes, museums in India should re-examine their methods of display. Many ethnographic museums in India continue to follow the colonial museum model, where the tribal societies are often depicted as living close to nature through dioramas. Many museums you will find in tribal museums, they are housed within the four walls. Maybe because the constraint of areas, space, in a place like Delhi or any congested city like Mumbai, you cannot expect to have a open air museum where they need lots of space to highlight or to show the real heritage of a country. So the use of local heritage, this Manav Sangrahalaya is using the local heritage as tool for local development by through the active participation of the local community throughout the country. Now these are some of the pictures of this Manav Sangrahalaya. This is the entrance. You see the space this Manav Sangrahalaya is having. This is all the natural surrounding. This is the hut that you can see. But for a visitor, it is a museum exhibit. They have this caption over here, which is denoting what how this hut was made or which community it belongs to. You can see these are the various shelters are made over here. So you can take a round of this museum. The whole museum is just like this only. This is another exhibit of the museum, built by the local people only. Local of that particular region. See here, this is another. You can easily make out that what this open air museum consists of. Why people love this museum, or what is the benefit of visiting this museum by us. This is another thing. Actually, this is to show the various development of the wheel as well as this whole structure, whole thing. You can make out that how earlier this kind of like tree houses or these things were actually used. Now to conclude this new museum theory, which is successful to some extent in creating a space for indigenous voice, it has been instrumental in bringing a positive change in the nature of relationship between museums and communities. The one-way relationship, which was the norm in the past, has been replaced by a two-way process where the input of the source communities in the management and representation of their cultural heritage is considered important. Nowadays, the museums are using new technologies to interpret and contextualize objects more efficiently. Cultural events and workshops are organized within the premise of the museum in order to give the visitors a better understanding of the cultures on display. However, New Museology has not been widely implemented in all the museums due to several factors, as I told you, the limitation in their space or contents. To adopt the principles of new museology and make it a part of museum practices is not straightforward at all. It is adopted by different museums depending on the values, missions and policies those museums have. Another major factor is the structural constraints which limit the degrees to which new museology can be practically applied in museums. In such museums, conventional understanding of museum as collection driven is still very much alive. Consequently, the activities of such museums are very much influenced and determined by their collections. Despite this, some progress has been made around the discourse of new museology and have been beneficial in bringing communities closer to museum. So that's all for this introductory class on new museology. One more class I will need to show more pictures to explain how the museum practitioners are actually working for the preservation of our indigenous culture as well as various things related to our tangible and intangible cultural heritage as well as natural heritage. These things are actually preserving the natural heritage too. So let's wait for the next class where I will show you more pictures and will explain you a bit more about the new museology. Thank you. Anything that you need to ask regarding today's class, so please feel free to ask. Yes, any doubt, any query? Am I audible? हेलो
Yes, ma'am.
मैं आप लोग बोलते नहीं है, मुझे समझ में नहीं आती है. कुछ पूछना है? एनीथिंग यू नीड टू आस्क? हैव यू गॉन थ्रू एनीथिंग? Is it tomorrow is holiday or you want to join for class?
We want class, ma'am.
So tomorrow shall I take class at this time? If you don't have any problem, because tomorrow is holiday. So that I can continue with this or day after tomorrow. Alok ji, is he available? Anything you want to ask? Why all of you are so silent? I mean, say something because I cannot make out. Hello? Hello? Some network issue. कोई समझ में नहीं आ रही मुझे कि कोई है नहीं है. आलोक जी
आलोक सर तो मैसेज करती है मैम।
हाँ 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 Today I will send you some material on this new museology. So just go through it. And if you have any doubt, have you understood or not? Because I have just new museology समझ में आया आप लोगों को? How why it is different from the traditional museum? New museology क्यों कहा जाता है? समझ में आया आप लोगों को?
जी बोलिए।
हाँ कल क्लास हो सकती है क्या?
कल क्लास कितने बजे देंगे?
हाँ
कल कितने बजे देंगे?